Good morning. We are going to read another chapter of Black Beauty today. So in yesterday's chapter, you would have learned that Black Beauty went to a horse fair. What was that horse fair like? Well, there were a lot of people bargaining, which means they're going back and forth in price, where they said, maybe I'll give 30 pounds, but the person pushes back and says, maybe give me 35 pounds, and they go back and forth. Well, thankfully, a good man purchased Black Beauty. Now, his name is Jerry Barker. We did not see that in the last chapter, but we're going to see that in the chapter today and hear a little more about Jerry and his family, all really wonderful people that I think you're going to greatly enjoy hearing about. So if you have your book to follow along, it's chapter 33. And if not, you can follow along with my screen. Okay, which is called A London Cab Horse. Now, Jeremiah Barker was my new master's name, but as everyone called him Jerry, I shall do the same. Polly, his wife, was just as good a match as a man could have. She was a plump, trim, tidy little woman with smooth dark hair, dark eyes, and a merry little mouth. Now the boy was 12 years old, a tall, frank, good-tempered lad, and little Dorothy, Dolly they called her, was her mother all over again, which means she was really similar to her, but at 8 years old. So Dolly was about the same age as many of you. They were all wonderfully fond of each other. I never knew such a happy, merry family before or since. Jerry had a cab of his own and 2 horses, which he drove and attended to himself. We've heard about cabs. Now, a cab is, we've probably heard of taxi cabs, similar to that. This would be a horse carriage and horses that would take people from place to place for a fee. They would pay for it. And so that's Jerry's job. He drives people around in his little carriage. His other horse, besides the Black Beauty, was tall, white, rather large-boned animal called Captain. He was old now, but when he was young, he must have been splendid. He had still a proud way of holding his head and arching his neck. In fact, he was a high-bred, fine-mannered, noble old horse, every inch of him. He told me that in his early youth, he went to the Crimean War. He belonged to an officer in the cavalry and used to lead the regiment. So as a war horse, we're going to hear more about this later. It even says, I will tell more of that hereafter. So as a war horse, he was at the front of the regiment. So he sort of led the troops. Obviously, it's not him making the decisions, but his rider is. That speaks a lot of him as a horse to obey commands well. If he had the best possible officer within the war riding him. It's a big responsibility. We'll hear more about Captain and his time as a war horse in a coming chapter. Now, the next morning when I was well groomed, Polly and Dolly came into the yard to see me and make friends. Harry had been helping his father since the early morning and had stated his opinion that I should turn out a regular brick, which means really solid, a good horse. Polly brought me a slice of apple and Dolly a piece of bread and made as much of me as if I'd been the Black Beauty of olden time. It was a great treat to be petted again and talked to in such a gentle voice, and I let them see as well as I could that I wished to be friendly. Polly thought I was very handsome, and a great deal too good for a cab if it was not for the broken knees. Of course, there's no one to tell us whose fault that was, said Jerry, and as long as I don't know, I shall give him the benefit of the doubt. Now, that's a good way to go about things. Giving someone the benefit of the doubt means that you believe the best in them. If they show that they're not trustworthy, then you might need to be careful. But if it seems that Black Beauty is a good horse, he doesn't need to start thinking, oh, he must be bad just because he has fallen and hurt his knees. Now, for a firmer, neater stepper, I never rode. We'll call him Jack. That's Black Beauty's new name now, Jack. After the old one. Shall we, Polly? Oh, do, she said, for I like to keep a good name going. Now, Captain went out in the cab all the morning. Harry came in after school to feed me and give me water. In the afternoon, I was put into the cab. Jerry took as much pains to see if the collar and bridle fitted comfortably as if he had been John Manley all over again. That's a high compliment. So Jerry is just as good as John Manley at keeping up with the horse and making him comfortable. When the crupper was let out a hole or two, it all fitted well. There was no check rein, that's the really short rein, also called a bearing rein. No curb, nothing but plain ring snaffle. So his head is loose and comfortable, but he's got the reins there so that he can stop when he needs to. What a blessing that was. After driving through the side street, we came to the large cab stand where Jerry had said good night. On one side of this wide street were high houses with wonderful shop fronts, and on the other was an old church and churchyard, surrounded by iron palisades. Along these iron rails, a number of cabs were drawn up, waiting for passengers. So lots of different carriages or cabs were waiting because at this place, different people are going to want to pay for a ride. Bits of hay were lying about on the ground. Some of the men were standing together talking. Some were sitting on their boxes, reading the newspaper, and one or two were feeding their horses with bits of hay and giving them a drink of water. We pulled up in the rank at the back of the last cab. 2 or 3 men came round and began to look at me and pass their remarks. Very good for a funeral, said one. He's too smart looking, said another, shaking his head in a very wise way. You'll find out something wrong one of these fine mornings, or my name isn't Jones. So these people are skeptical. They think Black Beauty looks like he'd be good for a funeral because of being a black horse, and one thinks he's too smart looking. So there must be a problem. That is not giving someone the benefit of the doubt. That's being very cynical or skeptical, thinking something's got to be bad. And that is not good for us to dwell or think about things that are negative like that. We should choose to believe the best. And that's what Jerry does. Well, said Jerry pleasantly, I suppose I need not find it out till it finds me out, eh? And if so, I'll keep up my spirits a little longer. So Jerry's a smart man. He's not just being ignorant, which we've seen a lot of people who are just ignorant. But Jerry is just saying, if he has his problems, I'll figure it out eventually and handle it when it comes. Then there came up a broad-faced man, dressed in a great gray coat with great gray cape and great white buttons. A gray hat and a blue comforter loosely tied round his neck. His hair was gray too, but he was a jolly-looking fellow, and the other men made way for him. So he must be well respected. He looked me all over, as if he had been going to buy me. And then, straightening himself up with a grunt, he said, He's the right sort for you, Jerry. I don't care what you gave for him. He will be worth it. It's the first person to say something good about him, other than Jerry's family. So he's saying, this is a good horse. Thus, my character was established on the stand. So all those people who were saying negative things, now they're corrected because this really respected man says, it's a good horse, Jerry. Good horse. This man's name was Grant, but he was called Gray Grant or Governor Grant. We saw that in the last chapter too. Governor is a British term of respect, showing that somebody is the boss or just somebody who is more respected in the community. Now, he had been the longest on that stand of any of the men, and he took it upon himself to settle matters and stop disputes, which are arguments. So he is like a judge. He's not actually a judge, but he takes it on himself to be kind of like the parent working out anything that are little problems amongst all of the children, these cab owners. He was generally a good-humored, sensible man, but if his temper was a little out, as it was sometimes when he had drunk too much, we know what happened to Reuben Smith when he drank too much. Nobody liked to come too near his fist, for he could deal a very heavy blow. So, Governor Grant, he is a good man, but when he has had too much to drink, he can become really violent, possibly hitting people. Now, the first week of my life as a cab horse was very trying, which means difficult. I'd never been used to London, and the noise, the hurry, the crowds of horses, carts, and carriages that I had to make my way through made me feel anxious and harassed. But I soon found that I could perfectly trust my driver. And then I made myself easy and got used to it. Jerry was as good a driver as I had ever known. And what was better, he took as much thought for his horses as he did for himself. He soon found out that I was willing to work and do my best, and he never laid the whip on me unless it was gently drawing the end of it over my back when I was to get on. But generally, I knew this quite well by the way in which he took up the reins, and I believe his whip was more frequently stuck up by his side than in his hand. It's really telling. He trusts Black Beauty enough that he keeps the whip over here and just uses the reins for Black Beauty. Still there if he needs the whip, but he doesn't usually, and he realizes that he can trust Black Beauty. In a short time, I and my master understood each other as well as a horse and man can do. In the stable, too, he did all that he could for our comfort. The stalls were the old-fashioned style, too much on the slope, but he had 2 movable bars fixed across the back of our stalls so that at night and when we were resting, he just took off our halters and put up the bars, and thus we could turn about and stand whichever way we pleased, which is a great comfort. Now, Jerry kept us very clean and gave us as much change of food as he could, and always plenty of it. And not only that, but he always gave us plenty of clean, fresh water, which he allowed to stand by us both night and day, except, of course, when we came in warm. Some people say that a horse ought not to drink all he likes, but I know if we are allowed to drink when we want it, we drink only a little at a time, and it does us a great deal more good than swallowing down half a bucketful at a time. That's not good for people either. You should just drink when you get thirsty, drink when you need to, not everything all at once at one part of the day. Because we've been left without till we are thirsty and miserable. Now, some grooms will go home to their beer and leave us for hours with our dry hay and oats and nothing to moisten them, make them wet. Then, of course, we gulp down too much at once, which helps us to spoil our breathing and sometimes chills our stomachs. But the best thing we had here was our Sundays for rest. We worked so hard in the week that I do not think we could have kept up to it but for that day. Besides, we had then time to enjoy each other's company. It was on these days that I learned my companion's history. Okay, that's where we're going to stop. What would you say Jerry Barker is like? Is he a good horse owner? What specifically makes him a good owner, similar to the way John Manley treated the horses? Might be thinking he believes the best in his horses, right? Gives them the benefit of the doubt. Plenty of water, plenty of food, comfortable. He doesn't have to have the bearing or check reins on his head. And he's kind to the horse too. To Black Beauty, or Jack is now Black Beauty's name, and other horses too. Okay, that is the end of the chapter. We'll read chapter 34 tomorrow. And we'll talk to you all later. Bye.